What's up, everybody? And in today's episode, COVID quarantine camps, they are coming for your kids. It's a very warm welcome to TSP TV. So all that remains is to open up the doors to the thrift store and dive into the contents of today's episode. So as I said, a very warm welcome to the thrift store studio. So before we do get into today's contents and theme for the episode, I do need to cast your minds back to the not so distant past and a video I put up entitled "The World Health Organization Wants to Remove Your Family Members." Now in that video that I put out, I highlighted an article from the mainstream news streams concerning a spokesperson from the World Health Organization, whose name I don't remember and isn't really important in the grand scale of schemes. He's just a puppet reading from a script, playing the part he is being paid to play. But in that episode, I did highlight out, and we listened to the this statement from the World Health Organization, how although they've done everything they possibly can in order to flatten the curve at a street level, it's not actually enough to combat it in its entirety. And measures that they do need to take and are looking to take is to possibly come into your household and remove infected people and then take them to a safe and dignified quarantine center where they can be taken away from voluntary quarantine and be put into enforced quarantine. Oh my word, we had a little bit of a mishap there with the studio. Okay, so hopefully we've resolved that. As you notice, we do still keeping on the rearranging, but I didn't draw your attention to it too much. Hope you just saw it for yourself. So anyway, what we were saying about the World Health Organization, they want to come in and remove people from your household and take them to dignified and safe quarantine facilities, detention centers, or concentration camps, if you want, where you will be put into an enforced quarantine. So another video I did also want to draw your attention to is, again, you might have to cast your minds to the not so distant past to remember this, was entitled "Theme Wars, the Phantom Virus." It was a mirrored video that pointed out the fact that the United States presidency had actually handed over control of the nation to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Good old FEMA. But on that thumbnail, I used a picture of the Emperor Palpatine from the Star Wars saga, and also put a little quirky "Execute Executive Order 66. Those of you familiar with the Star Wars movie will understand the reference of Order 66. It was a predetermined, pre-programmed directive that had been put in the minds of the of the clones who are now adults at the time of infancy. In fact, before they were actually left their tubes, they had a chip implanted in their brains that included the Executive Order 66, which was to turn on and kill and wipe out all of the Jedi who had then become, by that time, an enemy to the all-new singular galactic government empire, as it was transformed from the Galactic Republic to a singular one galaxy order under the control of Palpatine, who is the representation in the Star Wars movie of the shadow government and the elites, the Sith, acting in the shadows, influencing and manipulating both sides of the conflict in order to gain and achieve their final goal of total galactic domination. Now, obviously, Star Wars, if you look beyond the lightsabers, Ewoks, Death Stars and X-Wing fighters, not to mention Metachlorians and Gungans in Disney Plus spin-off series. There is actually a lot of hidden prophecy and agenda within Star Wars, and I might even have to do an entire segment about next week during the Spring Break 2020 festivities. But this episode and that video that I put up a little while ago explaining how now FEMA are in charge of the United States government, and how maybe they already have predetermined directives that have been planned out years in advance, that they are just looking to implement in order to gain great control. And we're having a little bit of difficulties with our card there, so maybe that's it. Hopefully it stays in place. But recently the United States Congress have implemented some legislation, or have proposed some legislation called HR 666, Order 66. People, we can't make this shit up, and it's COVID-19 testing, research, and contacting everyone. The TRACE Act, and TRACE stands for testing, researching, and contacting everyone. And are they about to start executing Order 66666 on our asses and rounding us up and either eliminating us or possibly taking us to COVID-19 quarantine camps? Now, another thing that was particularly interesting also was the government of Canada, and also believe FEMA and the CDC had also placed listings some time ago. So I think the Canadian one was around 2015, 2016, and more recently last year, I believe the CDC put out some job listings also for quarantine enforcement agents, and these were people that were going to be employed to make sure everybody abided by and to enforce the new legislation of COVID tracing and tracking and quarantine measures that are going to be put in place once the doors finally do open up to society once again, although it's not going to be a society like the one we left behind before this pandemic. And this is the purpose behind the pandemic. There is no coronavirus COVID-19 strain that's killing the globe. It's all a big smokescreen and rise and guise in order for the elites using their governmental puppets in their big organizations that are part of a militarized industrial complex to implement their measures of totalitarian control and total surveillance. So I do got a few articles that we are going to be looking into momentarily, but before we do that, I'm going to point out the fact that what the purpose of this video and the episode's content is kind of being based on was I just recently got some information sent to me this afternoon, which at the time of recording is May the something or other. Who fucking knows anymore under this pandemic? You just lose trace of the weeks and days. But I think it's about the 14th or 15th of May 2020. But anyway, this week there has been some further job listings that have been put out by the government, or the local government rather, in Washington State, looking to fill some positions of children's quarantine enforcement center employees. However, that listing has been removed from the government website of Washington, governmentjobs.org or .com, whichever one it is. The listing has been removed, and I'm guessing because in the last couple of days since that listing came to light, it has shed a very, very dark truth on what that is all about. So we will be going over now and looking at one or two articles in recent times and some articles from again the not so distant past that are all relevant and possibly suggest that this is very, 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 very evident that this whole thing has been planned in order to gain a little bit more control and to remove some of our freedoms and liberties, which is much, 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 much more deadly of consequences than any imaginary bogus virus. Okie dokie, so here we are going to dive into our first article. I'm not sure if you can see it here. It is on Crime Online, and that I guess is just a generic picture that they're using of an emergency car park, I guess, and a tent outside, and they're using that little barricade there as some kind of symbolism, I'm guessing. But this is the article that I found in reference to the job listing that was put out on the Washington state government jobs website, and as you can see, their job listing sparks fears that children with COVID-19 symptoms will be taken from their home place and placed in emergency quarantine centers. And again, quarantine centers could also be concentration camps if you want to look at it in a very dark and disturbing light. But anyway, a government job listing in Washington state prompted fears and rumors that children who have tested positive for coronavirus should be taken from their homes and put into a quarantine facility. Earlier this month, Washington State Department of Children, Youth and Families, the DCYF, posted an internal position titled Social Service Specialist 3 COVID-19 Care with the following job description. Now I did try to follow the link for the actual listing, but as I said, it has been removed, but this is a little bit of, I guess, whether they copied and pasted this or whatever, but this is what was taken from that listing. The DCYF is seeking current DCYF employees in King Snohomish, is that how you say that, and Benton counties to volunteer to supervise and support children and youth in emergency quarantine centers. Very interesting. While this is a voluntary effort, you will be compensated for ranges approximately 20% above your current base salary while performing these duties, and return to your normal position and salary once concluded. Okay, so the job posting included 3 different locations where positions would report, including a church and religious camp. The religious camp's a little bit interesting. They're going to maybe perhaps round up certain kids of a certain religion for some kind of maybe reprogramming, as well as decontamination from an imaginary virus. But the listing was picked up by a job sites including Glassdoor and has circulated on social media. On Twitter, a doctor who is part of the anti-vaxxer movement shared the listing with a message that the DCYF is hiring to snatch kids out of their homes if somebody in the home tests positive for the C virus. Now again, this was something that was implemented in that news statement from the World Health Organization not very long ago that they need to maybe have to come into the household to remove the threat of the virus at a house and family level and take people to safe and dignified contamination camps or COVID quarantine centers. So this is the tweet from Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. OCF in #WASH is hiring to snatch kids out of their homes if someone in the home tests positive for coronavirus. 2 weeks ago, fact checkers said it was fake news. DCYF Social Service Special 3 COVID-19 care internal only government jobs. And there is the listing. Can we click on that and see if we can get the listing up? And there you go, you see for yourself, oh no, something went wrong. So let's come back to the article itself, and as you can see, it has been removed. Why has it been removed exactly? Have they filled the positions? Are they no longer available, or are they a little bit ashamed that this leaked beyond an internal beyond eternal eyes only? In response to the apparent backlash, the Washington DCYF posted a media statement on its website clarifying that the job listing was in reference to facilities not yet in operation that would serve state-dependent children and youth in out-of-home care who, due to being COVID positive or COVID exposed, do not currently have foster homes available. The statement also clarified that the sites listed in the job posting were included prematurely and had not signed off on this job listing. That sounds to me like a little bit of damage control, that they listed these jobs, they got made public, and all of a sudden they're trying to hide it away, make excuses. That's why the job listing has been taken down, so nobody can discredit it and prove that they are saying something different. So I mean, kind of what they're saying, if there are no foster homes available for children that are suffering from COVID-19, then there would be no alternative but to take them to quarantine centers. But really and truly, I think the article did state and put out that they want to give these officials the power to be able to go into your homes without warrants, and this is something that is in the HR 666. Is that 3 or 4 sixes? But anyway, the 6666 Trace Act, which is suggested that people can come into your home without warrant to carry out testing and indeed remove people who may be infected and take them to quarantine. Below is the statement in full, and this is what the Washington state government published in efforts for damage control. In light of some concerns from the public regarding 2 recent job postings by Washington State Department of Children, Youth and Families, the DCYF, the agency would like to clarify the intent of these job listings and address the misinformation. Now, again, they're not there for us to see what the misinformation is. This response in this damage control, this is the misinformation, to try and say nothing to see here, guys, perfectly normal job listing. Move along, continue to flatten the curve, nothing to see here. The job postings targeted current staff interested in social service specialist 3 and social service specialist 5 positions. And again, it was kind of intended, I'm guessing, for internal eyes only, never meant to go viral on social media or for the public knowledge. The post prematurely looked included sites of potential locations in the community where we could house children in our legal care and authority who've tested positive for COVID-19. Again, prematurely, was the plans prematurely, or did they prematurely let you know that there are these camps where they plan to house children who have tested positive for COVID-19? In the event that a placement home was not available, it's not a lie if you believe it, government of Washington State, the facilities listed are not affiliated with DCYF. Maybe they're affiliated with FEMA, the Federal Emergency and Management Agency. FEMA camps, people, you've heard all about them for years. The conspiracies are becoming a fact. Not conspiracies, although it is a conspiracy in the sense that these people have had these plans to put these such camps into place for some years. But anyway, the facilities listed are not affiliated, and that's the DCYF had currently at this point not signed off on this job listing. So again, damage control, people. This is what this particular publication is about. The listings have since been taken down to avoid further confusion, in order to, what they really mean then, in order to prevent anybody finding out the truth and the real intent behind these job listings. And you know what you say about evidence. If you can present evidence to a court of law, it can indeed determine if or not you are found guilty. Without that evidence, it's a different case altogether to prove guilt or innocence. In response to COVID-19 pandemic, the DCYF began internal recruitment of social service specialists to care for foster children who are either COVID-19 positive or may have been exposed to COVID-19. In an event, a placement home was not available. Keep repeating the lie enough, it becomes the truth. And this is what this damage control is all about. Repeating a lie enough so you believe it. To clarify, and again, here we go with the repetition, those facilities and ultimately open their doors to this effort would only be house state dependent children and youth in out-of-home care who, due to being COVID-19 or COVID exposed, do not currently have a foster home available. These facilities are just for this limited scope and not considered quarantine centers or intended for the general public. Not a lie if you believe it. Keep repeating the lie, it becomes the truth, people. The Cedar Springs camp, one of the locations listed in the John postings, shared a message on its Facebook page on Monday acknowledging that the camp had been incorrectly listed as a COVID quarantine facility. This was a surprise to us and is incorrect, the post read. Of course it is. It's a surprise that it become viral and public knowledge, perhaps. And again, damage control. Nothing to see here, people. This morning we learned that Cedar Springs was briefly listed on a state Washington website, and it was listed and has since been removed. To avoid your confusion, people, we don't want you confused. Don't start thinking for yourself and start researching for yourself. Take our word for it. It's better that way. We just don't want you getting confused with the fact that we're lying and there may be truthful evidence out there that could prove that we're lying. Just believe what we say, guys. This was a surprise to us and incorrect. After contacting the state officials regarding this make, Cedar Springs will be removed from the website. And again, that's because they don't want people finding out where it is. As of Tuesday, the unmodified listing remains active on multiple job sites, including governmentjobs.com. In response to a request for further clarification, a Washington DCYF spokesman noted that the original job posting had been removed from the agency's website, and Crime Online confirmed that it no longer exists there. And we just saw for ourselves, guys, it had been removed. The spokesperson Nancy Guterres reiterated that some of the details in the listing were posted prematurely and in error. It was an error. They listed it too soon. They didn't want people to know, and the error was that it was posted and people got to know about it before they should, or even were intended to know about it at all, and said that the description of the facilities as emergency quarantine centers was not accurate. Nothing to see here, guys. Just repeat the lie until it becomes the truth. She also said the job is not considered a volunteer position, contrary to the language of the job posting. And we did sort of see that it suggested they would get a 20% increase to their salary if they did volunteer for this position. Now, maybe why they need you to volunteer from this position as opposed to just going in and doing your everyday duties as an employer of the DCYF out there in Washington State is because perhaps the duties that you're going to have to be volunteering for are a little bit disturbing and dark, in the fact that you might be dragging family members out of their homes, breaking up loving families and taking them kicking and screaming to quarantine contamination camps. And here we are, this is interesting. We are looking for locations in these communities where we could house foster children. Not a lie if you believe it, people who tested positive and who do not have a placement. Again, you see they're repeating that line, who do not have a placement, Guterres said, adding that the locations were only potential sites and should not have been included in the listing. The listing should never have made the light of day, is what they're trying to say. Guterres also said that the initiative to provide separate housings for foster youth affected by COVID-19 originated within the agency in preparation for a possible need during the pandemic and was not a result of federal or state directive. Interesting choice of words there, directive. And remember, we were just mentioning about the directive Executive Order 66, something that was pre-programmed in the clone troopers in their embryonic infancy. Predetermined, guys. She said that there were no juveniles currently quarantined at any of these locations. Doesn't mean they're not quarantined at other locations, people, including the job listings, but indicated that some juveniles in state facilities, including behavior rehabilitation services, may be in isolation within these structures. They may be there. So what does that mean? Are they there or aren't they there? They may be there, they may not be there. Keep us guessing, guys. No admission, plausible deniability. Asked if foster children currently placed in homes could be subjected to removal if they are symptomatic or test positive for coronavirus, Guterres said in a follow-up email that our expectation is actually that a child that tests positive stay in their current placement and in self-quarantine. So we would recommend to foster parents or relative placements. So we would recommend that to foster parents or relative placements. Guterres also said that caseworkers are available to help facilitate testing for children in the foster system. These 3 facilities listed on the job posting did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Crime Online will provide further updates when information is available. So that was the end of that article, guys, which was very, very interesting and disturbing. As I said, a lot of damage control, a lot of repeating the lie to try and make you believe that they have nothing but wholesome intentions and they just want to keep everybody safe from the COVID. So let's go and look at another article, shall we? Okay, so here's a little article from the Washington State Department of Health. And look there for more information about the 2019 novel coronavirus situation. Please visit our website, our page. So anyway, isolation and quarantine guidelines and forms. So there's some stuff that is on their pages. Options for initiating quarantine and isolations, options for non-compliance, to extend isolation or quarantine period, release of individual release of an individual from isolation and quarantine. All four of those should be ringing alarm bells to you guys. So let's look at this one. Here, if we can, isolation and quarantine forms and resources. The forms found on this page can be used by local health officers, maybe the people that were volunteering to do those duties in the job listings. Might be the health officers that would be able to use these forms. When they find it necessary to isolate or quarantine individuals, the forms are in Word format. You to use the forms, open a copy, save it to your computer and complete it there. So the forms will make it legal. Options for initiating quarantine or isolation. There you go. You've got a form, a number for you there that you can use to make it legal. Local health officers have three options for initiating the quarantine or isolation of an individual. The procedure chosen should be based on the amount of cooperation expected from the individual quarantined or isolated. It seems very, very intriguing, guys. Should you have a little look at that one? Procedures for isolation or quarantine at his or her sole discretion, and it's just the opinion of the health officer. What do they mean by that, sole discretion? A local health officer may issue an emergency detention order. Here we go, guys. Told you it gets interesting. Causing a person or group of persons to be immediately detained for purposes of isolation or quarantine in accordance with there's also subsection 3 of this section, or may petition the Superior Court ex parte for an order to take the person or group of persons into, look at that word there, guys, involuntary detention for the purposes of isolation or quarantine in accordance with subsection 4 of this section, provided that he or she A has first made reasonable efforts which shall be documented to obtain voluntary compliance. Once they've tried to get voluntary compliance, then they can go the involuntary route, with requests for medical examination, testing, treatment, counseling, vaccination, decontamination of persons or animals, isolation, quarantine, and inspection on closure of facilities, or has determined in her professional judgment that seeking voluntary compliance would create a risk of serious harm, and B has reason to believe that the person or group of persons is suspected to be infected. So one individual can go into a building and decide and determine on his own discretion if or not a group of people is infected. and then he can get them to voluntarily accept their suggestions for decontamination or isolation and quarantine. And if they don't, then he can then have the authority to use involuntary measures to remove these groups of people or individuals. He has reason to believe suspected to be infected with, exposed to, or contaminated with a communicable disease or chemical, biological, or radiological agent that could spread to or contaminate others if remedial action is not taken, and has the reason to believe that a person or group of persons would not pose a serious and imminent risk to health and safety of others if not detained for purposes of isolation and quarantine. Again, detained. 2. A local health officer may invoke the powers of police officers, sheriffs, constables, and all other officers and employees of any political subdivisions within the jurisdiction of the health department to enforce immediately orders given to effectuate the purpose of this section in accordance with the provisions of RCW 432050 and 70.05.120. If a local health officer orders the immediate involuntary detention of a person or group of persons, again, he can detain as many as he wants that he decides that may be contaminated. A person or group of persons for purpose of isolation or quarantine. A. The emergency detention order shall be for a period not to exceed 10 days. The local health officer shall issue a written emergency detention order as soon as reasonably possible and in all cases within 12 hours of detention. That should specify the following. 1. The identity of all persons or groups subject to isolation or quarantine, the premises subject to isolation or quarantine, the date and time at which isolation or quarantine commences, the suspected communicable disease or infectious agent if known, the measures taken by local health officer to seek voluntary compliance, or the basis on which the local health officer determined that seeking voluntary compliance would create a risk of serious harm, and the medical basis on which the isolation or quarantine is justified. The local health officer will provide copies of a written emergency detention order to the person or group of persons detained, or if the order applies to a group and it is impracticable to provide individual copies, post copies in a conspicuous space in the premise where the isolation or quarantine has been imposed. So that's a very, very, very long article, guys, and you can see it goes on and on, but just off the basis of reading that, you can see that there's some pretty scary measures being taken already. What was that? That was the initiating quarantine. Options of non-compliance. Let's go and look at that one. Did we get that one? Or have we gone too far? Sorry. Options for non-compliance. If you used the local health officer request for voluntary quarantine initially, then use the forms in either or the above sections. So if you've asked them to voluntarily go along with your quarantine and they've refused, then you get to use this form. Can we get it up? Why can't we get it up? A little bit like Mark Zuckerberg. I'm pretty sure he can't get it up, or has ever been able to get it up at all. This is interesting. Court order for involuntary isolation or quarantine. There you go. You can see the code number there. Likely to be used when non-confident that individual will comply with the request or local health officer order. Local health officer believes that it may be necessary to move a contempt of court proceeding with the threat of incarceration and or greater fine to secure the individual as a supplement to the local health officer order for involuntary isolation or quarantine. Both can be obtained, i.e. not mutually exclusive. Note, there are two sets of pleadings here. Provides these two methods which affects the local health officer affects that what that local health officer must include in his declaration. That is the reason for two sets of pleading. Take note that the footer to see which pleading is being used. So there's some sort of stuff that's a little bit over my head, I guess, in terms of the legalities. When voluntary compliance was sought but the individual refused or otherwise indicated that he or she would not comply, use the following forms. There's a summons verb, detention ex parte, petition when voluntary detention refused, options for non-compliance. If you used the local health officer request for voluntary, then you can go on and use these two here. So I'm getting a little bit mixed up in some of this, but you can kind of see some of the stuff. Whoa. If used a court order for involuntary isolation or quarantine initially, then seek an order from the court finding the individual in contempt of court under Chapter 7, incarceration and or fine up to $2,000 a day. That's if they're found in contempt of court, I guess, for not going along with the health orders requests for voluntary isolation. To extend isolation or quarantine period, there's another form you can fill in to make that legal. So a lot of ways and measures that are being put in place here. I mean, as I say, guys, we could read each and every single one of these, but I'll probably try and put this for you in a link to this in the description. But that is one in particular from the the Health Department of Washington State. And as you said, we did look at a lot of this, guys, and you can see for yourself. If you want to just stop and pause some of these at any time, you can, and read them for yourself. So the Department of Health in Washington State already has this legislation in place and the legal documents in order for these health officers to use to their discretion when or if they encounter individuals that may be reluctant to voluntarily put themselves into quarantine. Then there's a whole lot of measures that these health officers can take, including calling in law enforcement agencies to help round up individuals or group or of individuals that they determine that may or may not be infected by COVID-19. Some pretty disturbing stuff, wouldn't you agree? Okie dokie. So there's a little article from Global News back on April the 8th, 2020. And look what it says. Coronavirus. 23 Canadians being held at a federal quarantine site. So they have federal quarantine sites, and they're letting us know that there are 23 Canadians being held at them. And here he is, our boy Justin Turdo. Let's see what Justin Turdo has to say.
I've been very clear on this. The premiers, Dr. Tam, and public health officials have all been very clear on this. If you've just returned from abroad, you have to go home and stay home for 14 days. But some people have not been taking this seriously. They're stopping by the grocery store on their way home from the airport. They're getting together with friends after being away for March break. This kind of conduct is not just disappointing, it's dangerous. So now, a 14-day quarantine will be mandatory for all Canadians returning home from abroad. We are implementing the Quarantine Act to keep all Canadians safe. If you do not comply with these instructions, you could face serious fines and even prison time.
So there you go, guys. Prison time. And fines for not following and abiding by the Quarantine Act. So there it is. The Trudeau government says 23 Canadians were being housed in a federal quarantine center. The newly released figures, the most current available, provides a glimpse into how the federal government is using its considerable powers, and you might even say that they are abusing those considerable powers in order to obtain further and greater power, not for the citizens or the public that they are supposed to be serving, but for their elite banker cabal overlords who do control these politicians like puppets on a string. The Public Health Agency of Canada says that as of Sunday night, and this is some time ago, remember, back in April, almost 24 Canadians were in federally designated quarantine sites and federally supported self-quarantine lodgings. The agency set up the sites and said it is working with partners to manage them. Agency spokesperson Maurice Durette says no information about the location of the sites being closed to protect the privacy of quarantine Canadians, and it's not to protect the privacy of the quarantined Canadians. It is to protect the privacy of the agencies and the individuals that work there and the goings on within the walls of those centers, and that is what they are trying to protect, not the privacy at all of the people that are there. Under the Quarantine Act, the health minister can that was strange. The health minister can designate any place in Canada as a quarantine facility. An emergency order under the quarantine law requires all travels to returning to Canada to immediately self-isolate for 14 days. Those with symptoms must put on a mask before leaving the airport. Compliance with the order is subject to monitoring, verification, and enforcement. Those in violation may face detention in a quarantine facility, as well as a fine, imprisonment, or both. The government says, why not do both, government? Fucking get your kits, get your rocks off, enjoyed. Let's see what little Turdo says in this one, is it?
Just as a follow-up, you yourself a couple days ago described some of the scenarios as fairly dire. Why is it that you can't release the projections that you have now, the range of scenarios that you've talked about, from things working to things being fairly dire?
I think people can imagine a range of scenarios that shows everything from everyone gets suddenly better within the next few weeks to this situation just keeps getting worse, and we face a situation like some other countries in the most dire situations have. There is a range out there, and just highlighting that range is not as useful or important as being able to get clearer numbers and clearer analysis of what we are likely to face. But everything that we are going to face will be directly linked to how people behave today. And that is why it is so important that people stay home, that they continue with the social distancing, continue keeping 2 meters apart, continue to look to minimize their movements as much as possible so that we can get through this in the best shape possible.
So there you go. Not saying lots, but saying nothing at all. Saying they haven't really got any real clue or what idea of what we are facing, but just keep doing as we're telling, and just how irresponsible you are if you don't comply. At a media briefing, Turdo said that Turdo, you could almost maybe start calling him Dictator Castro. Of course, his mummy was a little bit of a cum dumpster for that little communist dictator Fidel Castro down in Cuba, because the Trudeau men, or the Turdo men, they don't got big penises, and they have tiny little balls that can not impregnate anyone. And I'm pretty sure that Turdo's children are the product of test tube babies or cloning. But anyway, little dictator Castro, as he might be starting to be known in the not so distant future, as we do continue here in Canada to see the implementation of socialist measures to try and combat this fictitious phantom virus. But he also made it clear federal quarantine sites were still in use. And this is back in April, folks. We're now in May. How many Canadians are in these federal quarantine camps at the moment? Who only knows? We have facilities available for people who are returning to Canada and for various reasons cannot quarantine themselves at home, or if home is too far from the airport. That is why we have institutions in place and they are being used. So that's what I'm telling you guys. They have the institutions in place. They were planning for this stuff, and they were planning on the behavior of people, and that's what he said, is how people behave is important. They need to start getting people to behave in the desired manner. Now, most people are sheeple and are going along with the desired manner and are turning on their fellow humans who may be a little bit more critical thinking and open-minded and can see through the lies and bullshit of the mainstream narrative in these propaganda campaigns to get you to believe that the sky is falling and the emperor's new clothes are the fanciest fabric in the world, and if you're stupid you can't see them. And it's a little bit like that. If you're stupid, you can't see the lies, and they want you to believe you're intelligent by believing misinformation that is being represented by so-called experts in world organizations that have your best interests at heart. These are the people that are spinning the propaganda. These are the mind control brainwashers. These are the people that are influencing the masses and the population into buying this propaganda. And that's what propaganda and psychological operations are all about. They need an excuse and a rise to implement the psychological operation. And the guys and the smokescreen is the COVID-19 strain. And China, guys, is the Lee Harvey Oswald in this psychological operation. There's always a Lee Harvey Oswald in JFK. It was Lee Harvey himself in Oklahoma City. It was Timothy the McVeigh and the U-Haul van. In 9/11, it was the radicalized extremists that armed themselves with box cutters, taught themselves to fly small propeller wooden planes, but then managed to carry out death-defying feats of physical impossibilities in jet aircraft, commercial jet aircraft that pushed those aircraft beyond their designed capabilities and managed to successfully hit 3 of their 4 targets. They were the Lee Harvey Oswald in the 9/11 PSYOP, and in this PSYOP, it is China. All things point fingers. It was China's fault. They did it. It's China's fault. China did it. China's created it in a biolab. Why are you looking at China, guys? You're not looking at what your own government's doing, and your own government is getting very, very North Korea, folks. And as I said, dictator Castro, little Justin Trudeau with his small cock and little balls, he's telling us that we need to behave in a certain way, and the way we behave is important to how this pandemic plays out. It isn't a pandemic, it was a planned calculated psychological operation designed to remove us from freedoms, civil liberties, and to implement draconian totalitarian new doctrine in constitutional laws, and how we will be able to live our lives in the future will possibly be under total submission to the surveillance state. Okie dokie. So something that's mentioned in a previous article was the Quarantine Act, and here is the Canadian Justice Laws website. Quarantine Act, SC 2005. That's when the Quarantine Act, I guess, was implemented to the law system here, and it says 2005 C20, so I guess that's from 2005 until present day. And here is the full document, accessibility buttons available, all that stuff if you need to. Assented to 2005 05 13, so I'm guessing that is the date of when this Quarantine Act was introduced to Canadian law. An act to prevent the introduction and spread of communicable disease. An act to prevent the introduction and spread of communicable disease. Her Majesty, with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follow. Short title: this act may be cited as the Quarantine Act. Interpretation. Definitions. The two are following definitions apply in this act. Communicable disease means a human disease that is caused by an infectious agent or a biological toxin that poses a risk of significant harm to the public health, or a disease listed in the schedule, and includes an infectious agent that causes a communicable disease. Malady, I can't read that. Transmissible. Conveyance means a watercraft, aircraft, train, motor vehicle, trailer, or other means of transportation, included a cargo container that arrives in Canada or is in the process of departing from Canada. Departure point means any designated by the minister under section 10. Entry point means a point designated. Okay. Medical examination includes ascertaining the relevant medical history and travel history of the person being examined and the conduct of physical examination and any laboratory tests or radiographic or diagnosis tests that are required to make determination of whether the person might have a communicable disease. Medical practitioner means a person who is entitled to practicing medicine, and I guess these are all the definitions in here. Quarantine facility, this is what we wanted to get to, means any place that is used for the detention of a traveler. Quarantine station means any place that is used for the administration and enforcement of this act. So a quarantine center is where you would go. Quarantine station, I guess, is where you would go when you are undergoing an enforced quarantine period, perhaps. Screening officer means a person designated as a screening officer under subsection 5, section 1, or an officer within the meaning of subsection 2 of the Custom Acts. Now, we're not going to go much more further. There is a lot more here. The purpose of this act is to protect public and health by taking comprehensive measures to prevent the introduction of spread of communicable diseases. Power ministers. And as I said, guys, if you want, I can go down this. It's a very, very long article, I think, and I will possibly get a link for this one in the comments below if you want to read all of this yourself. But if you really want to, you can stop and pause at your leisure and read at your leisure. And let's see if we can get to the bottom of this. As I say, it's very, very long. Very long. We're not even halfway down yet. So as I said, I think I'm just going to possibly put the link to this article in the description for you. But we did have a little look at the beginning there just to kind of get a little idea of what the Canada Quarantine Act is and when it was implemented. 2005 people. So were they planning it for that long? Quite possibly they were planning it longer than that, guys. So quarantine centers and these health officials or health officers that have the power to determine if or not you are contaminated or a risk, or if you are voluntarily complying or non-voluntarily complying to quarantine measures. It seems to be something that they have been looking into doing for quite some time, and that is why they have taken all this time and length and measures to provide all the legal legislation and documentation required to make sure the government is protected from taking your civil liberties, personal freedoms, and rights away for you in these draconian measures under the guidelines of the Quarantine Act. And that's why they have to put these emergency acts into place, because once they then do mean certain laws and constitutional rights are no longer valid. And just like in Star Wars, when Palpatine asked for emergency powers in order to combat the threat of the Phantom Menace, in that case the Trade Federation, which was of course the organization that he himself was controlling and advising and doing so in order to gain the exact emergency orders that he acquired as a result of a pre-planned, premeditated psychological operation, albeit in a galaxy far, far away, a long, long time ago in the realms of fiction. But the truth, or the real kind of similarities I'm trying to get for is the fact that all of a sudden we do have governments that have been granted emergency powers, and agencies that are designed to act in the event of an emergency have powers that supersede those of the government are in place. And when these emergency measures and powers are granted, it's often very, very unlikely they get relinquished. Okie doke, so one last little article before we do head back to the thrift store studio in order to wrap this episode up, comes from the government of Canada itself, and it is job opportunities. And this, I think, is from 2018, perhaps. I'm not sure if the date's on there, but when I clicked on the link, it said it was from 2018 or possibly 2015. I can't remember now. But anyway, employment opportunities at Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada, government organizations. So there are a lot of job listings on here, and this is job opportunities available in the government, available to work within the government of Canada. So with more than 10,000 employees across Canada, Health Canada has the job opportunities for, and you can see some of them there. And it actually says more. So we are going to go all the way down. There are quite a lot of job listings here, but bear in mind this is from at least 5 years ago. I should have probably paid more attention to the date before I started this video, but you know, we're still having some teething troubles, even though we are trying to improve a little bit here at TSP TV. But bear with me as we get down here. As you can see, there are quite a few jobs, and this is the one that I wanted to bring up. There's actually two. Quarantine officer. So this is a job listing that they were putting out in 2015 or 2018. Excuse me guys for that blooper. But anyway, quarantine officers identify biosecurity risks at points of entry to Canada. You will assess ill travelers at land, sea, and air borders. As a medical professional, you will report on medical findings, liaise with local officials to minimize the risk of infectious diseases, and conduct health assessments to determine if the travelers need additional health measures. And this was the other one of interest. Regional regulatory compliance and enforcement officers, maybe like stormtroopers. Regional regulatory compliance and enforcement officers, what would that be? RRCEOs. Conduct inspections and compliance verifications of regulated products and industries, maybe industries or businesses that are essential or non-essential in the eyes of the government. This is an order to assess compliance and enforce applicable legislation. You will also respond to inquiries and complaints from partners, the public, and regulated parties. And the public there is something I need to highlight, that the public are being encouraged to rat out, report, and snitch on anyone that they see or feel is not complying with quarantine measures, self-isolation, social distancing, all the fucking bullshit, brainwashing, mind control propaganda that is being drummed into the minds of the sheeple that they are lapping up like a newborn baby suckling in its mother's teat of false information. That's quite poetic and beautiful. Don't know where that come from, but anyway, that's what I'm saying, guys, that the folks out there have been planning this shit for a long time, and that's why they've put all the legal measures, put job listings and everything else in place prior to this pandemic going live as it is now, and we are just playing out the days as part of the script and chapters to this psychological operation. And each and every week that goes by, we seem to find more draconian and more totalitarian measures being suggested and implemented by local governments in world organizations that did not have our best interests at heart, people. It's time to start waking up. Smell the coffee. Shrug your neighbors awake if you have to. If they don't wake up, they're a lost cause. We don't need them anyway. Hopefully, they'll take the final solution into their own hands and opt out of humanity, and thus make a conservative effort to flatten the curve for us. And maybe it's not a lot that too distant future to when the elites do start suggesting that we embrace the final solution, just as the National Socialists did back in Nazi Germany in the 30s and 40s to combat their Hebrew contamination problem that they suggested they had in the borders. I'm not saying that I agree that they had a Hebrew infestation or contamination problem. That was just the reason and the narrative that was put out by the National Socialists in order to make the public go along and comply and think that concentration camps were a good idea, just as we're being led to believe right now that contamination and quarantine centers are a good idea, and that government officials and employees should have the powers to determine if or not you should be taken into involuntary quarantine. And is it a matter of time before they start getting us loaded up on trains and taken to us to these quarantine camps, which would have a nice slogan over the gates as we enter: hand sanitization will set you free. So let's step back to the thrift store studio just to wrap this shit video production up and say goodbye until the next one. Okay, guys, so there was a lot of interesting information and some very relevant articles. I should like to think that do suggest quite strongly that this is all part of a premeditated, predetermined plan put together by the elites and now is being played out in real time before our very eyes. And you and I are all pawns in this elaborate psychological operation that is leading towards the one world order, the cashless society, the draconian socialism that we will be seeing, very similar to possibly that of the movies Soylent Green, and maybe a desolate lifestyle for the non-essentials that is depicted within the fictitious world of Ready Player One, a video I am lining up for your enjoyment in the not so distant future. So that's it, guys. That is the day's episode at an end and thus about to be concluded. As always, I do encourage thoughts, questions, and opinions in the comments below, and it's up to you if you feel like sharing this particular video on your social media or perhaps with other like-minded individuals as yourself that might benefit or maybe even provoke some further thoughts of your own by watching this video and sharing the information contained within it. If you want to hit the thumbs up, go right ahead, knock yourself out, have fun. In fact, press thumbs up, then press it to not like it, and then press it again. So double thumbs up. It's kind of like the the ding kind of thing. You know what I'm saying there, guys. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to Ship Video Productions TSP TV. So thanks for watching, guys. It is, as I just said, a Ship Video production for TSP TV. Hopefully we'll catch you in another one real soon, and until then, keep it thrifty and remember, be excellent to each other. Take care, guys, and peace out, y'all.